A husband abandoned his wife and 3 children in an old farmhouse with no electricity, no water, no heat, and just drove away. They had 3 days of food. Winter was coming. They should have died there. But what this mother built in that broken farmhouse saved over 15,000 families. Comment what city you're watching from and subscribe to the channel because this true story from Kansas will leave you speechless. USA. The farmhouse hadn't been lived in for over 20 years when Daniel Harper drove his family down the long gravel driveway that autumn afternoon in rural Kansas. Sarah Harper, 34 years old, sat in the passenger seat with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. Something felt wrong. She couldn't put her finger on it, but her husband's mood over the past week had been strange. Distant, cold, almost robotic. In the back seat were their 3 children, Lily, age 10, Ethan, age 7, and baby Grace, just 14 months old, strapped into her car seat and babbling happily, oblivious to the tension. "Daniel, where are we?" Sarah asked as they pulled up to the dilapidated farmhouse. "This doesn't look like your brother's place." "It's not," Daniel said flatly. "This is the old Harper family farm. My grandfather's place. Been empty since he died." Sarah looked at the house with growing unease. It was a 2-story structure that had once been white, but was now faded to a dirty gray. Several windows were broken. The porch sagged. The roof had visible holes. Weeds had overtaken what was once probably a yard. "Why are we here?" Daniel didn't answer. He just got out of the car, opened the back door, and started pulling out suitcases. Sarah's suitcases, she realized. And the children's. "Daniel, what's going on?" He finally looked at her, and his eyes were completely empty. "I can't do this anymore, Sarah. The marriage, the kids, the bills, all of it. I'm done." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What do you mean you're done?" "I mean I'm leaving. You and the kids can stay here. The property is paid off. It's been in the family for generations. There's a well for water. You'll figure it out." "Figure it out?" "Daniel, this house is falling apart. There's no electricity. It's almost winter. Not my problem anymore." He continued unloading bags onto the overgrown driveway. Sarah jumped out of the car. "You can't be serious. You're going to leave us here? In an abandoned farmhouse with 3 children. You wanted this family so badly. You begged me for kids. Well, now they're yours. Take care of them yourself. Daniel, please." But he was already getting back in the car. Sarah ran to the driver's side, grabbing his arm. "Don't do this. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. We can get help. Counseling. Anything." Daniel shook her off. "There's nothing to fix. I just don't want this life anymore. I don't want you. I don't want them." He gestured dismissively toward the car where the children were watching with confused, frightened eyes. "How can you say that about your own children?" "Easily. Because it's the truth." He started the engine. Sarah pulled on the door handle, but he'd already locked it. "Daniel, you can't leave us here. We have no phone service out here. No neighbors. This is the middle of nowhere." Through the window, Daniel said coldly. "There's a town about 15 miles west. You can walk if you need to. Or figure out how to make the farmhouse livable. Up to you. We'll die out here. Then you should have been a better wife. And with that devastating pronouncement, Daniel put the car in reverse and began backing down the long driveway. Sarah ran after him, screaming, "Daniel, come back, please. Think about the children." But he didn't even look back. Just turned onto the main road and drove away, leaving Sarah standing in the middle of the gravel driveway, watching the only vehicle they had disappear into the distance. Sarah stood there for a full minute, unable to process what had just happened. Then Lily's voice cut through her shock. "Mommy? Where did Daddy go?" Sarah turned to see all three children standing by the pile of luggage. Lily looked scared. Ethan was crying. Grace, too young to understand, was reaching for her mother. Sarah forced herself to take a deep breath, to think, to not completely fall apart in front of her children. "It's okay," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. We're going to have an adventure. We're going to stay at this old farmhouse for a little while." "Why did Daddy leave?" Ethan asked through his tears. "Daddy had to go somewhere. But Mommy's here. And I'm going to take care of you. All of you." Sarah picked up Grace and took Ethan's hand. "Come on. Let's look inside." The front door was unlocked, probably had been for years. Sarah pushed it open cautiously, half expecting the floor to collapse beneath her feet. Inside, the farmhouse was in slightly better condition than the exterior suggested. The structure was solid. These old farmhouses were built to last. But everything was covered in dust, cobwebs, and 20 years of neglect. The main floor had a living room, kitchen, dining room, and what looked like it had been a bedroom or office. Stairs led to the second floor. An old wood-burning stove sat in the kitchen, rusty but potentially functional. There was even some furniture left behind, a couch with torn upholstery, a dining table with rickety chairs, some shelves. Sarah tried a light switch. Nothing. Of course, no electricity. She tried the kitchen faucet. After a cough and a gurgle, rust-colored water came sputtering out. The well still worked, though the water would need to be boiled. She checked her phone. No signal. Of course not. They were in the middle of rural Kansas, miles from the nearest town. Sarah inventoried what Daniel had left them. Their suitcases with clothes, a box of food, maybe 3 days' worth, Sarah's purse with her wallet, containing $89 in cash and credit cards, diapers for Grace, about 2 days' worth, a flashlight, her phone, useless without signal. That was it. No tools. No camping equipment. No survival gear. It was late October. The temperature was already dropping at night, probably down to the 40s. Winter would be brutal here without heat. Lily tugged on Sarah's sleeve. "Mommy, I'm scared." Sarah knelt down and pulled all three children close. "I know, baby. But listen to me. Mommy used to help Grandpa on his farm when I was little. I know about farmhouses. I know how to make things work. We're going to be okay." She hoped that was true. Sarah spent the next few hours in survival mode. First priority was making a safe place for the children to sleep. She found relatively clean rooms upstairs, the master bedroom and a smaller bedroom that must have been for children. The mattresses were old but intact. She used sheets from their suitcases to cover them. Second priority was water. She let the faucet run for 10 minutes to clear out the rust, then filled every container she could find. The water was still brownish but would be safe if boiled. Third priority was warmth. The nights were getting cold. She examined the wood-burning stove. It was old but functional. Now she needed firewood. Lily, Ethan, I need you to help me. We need to collect wood for a fire. For the next hour, Sarah and the children gathered fallen branches and dead wood from around the property. There was plenty. The yard and surrounding fields were overgrown with trees and brush. By the time darkness fell, Sarah had managed to get a fire going in the old stove. It smoked badly at first, the chimney needed cleaning, but eventually settled into a steady burn that provided warmth to the kitchen. She made dinner from their limited supplies, peanut butter sandwiches and canned fruit. The children ate quietly, too shocked by the day's events to talk much. Where are we going to live? Lily finally asked. Here. For now. But this house is broken. I know. But we're going to fix it. How? Sarah looked around at the dilapidated farmhouse. Broken windows, holes in the walls, an ancient stove, no electricity, no phone service. How indeed? I don't know yet, honey. But I'll figure it out. That's what mommies do. After dinner, Sarah got the children ready for bed. She tucked them all into the master bedroom, safety in numbers, and lay down beside them. Grace fell asleep immediately. Ethan followed soon after, exhausted from crying. Lily stayed awake longer, holding her mother's hand. Daddy's not coming back, is he? Lily whispered. Sarah's throat tightened. I don't know, sweetie. I heard what he said. That he doesn't want us. Sarah pulled her daughter close. He's not thinking clearly. He's going through something. But you need to know, none of this is your fault. Not yours, not Ethan's, not Grace's. You are all perfect and wonderful and loved. So loved. I love you, Mommy. I love you too, baby. So much. And I promise you, I'm going to take care of you. All of you. No matter what. After Lily fell asleep, Sarah lay awake in the darkness, staring at the ceiling and trying not to panic. Daniel had abandoned them in an uninhabitable farmhouse in the middle of nowhere with 3 days of food and no way to contact anyone. This wasn't just cruel. This was criminal. Abandonment. Child endangerment. Possibly attempted murder. But anger wouldn't help her right now. Survival would. Tomorrow, she would walk to town. 15 miles if Daniel had been telling the truth. She'd report what happened. Get help. Figure out their next steps. But first, they had to survive the night. Sarah fed the wood stove one more time, making sure it would burn through the cold October night. Then she crawled back into bed with her 3 sleeping children and finally allowed herself to cry silently. Her husband, the man she'd loved and trusted for 12 years, had thrown them away like garbage. But Sarah Harper was not garbage. And neither were her children. They would survive this. They would find a way forward. And Daniel would pay for what he'd done. What Sarah didn't know, couldn't know, was that this abandoned farmhouse held secrets. And those secrets would change everything. Not hidden treasure or forgotten wealth. Something else. Something that would transform their tragedy into something entirely unexpected. But that discovery was still days away. Tonight, she was just a terrified mother in an abandoned farmhouse, holding her children and praying for dawn. Sarah woke at dawn to the sound of Grace crying. The baby was hungry, and they were almost out of baby food. She fed Grace the last jar, then made oatmeal for Lily and Ethan using water boiled on the wood stove. The children ate quietly, Still processing yesterday's trauma. Okay, Sarah said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Here's the plan. I need to walk to town today to get help. But that's a long walk. Probably will take me most of the day there and back. So you three are going to stay here. By ourselves. Lily's eyes went wide. Just for a few hours. The door locks. The stove will keep you warm. You'll be safe. What if Daddy comes back? Then you don't open the door. You hide upstairs and wait for me. Mommy, I'm scared, Ethan said. I know, baby. But I have to get help. We need food. We need to tell someone what Daddy did. And I can't carry Grace 15 miles. Sarah spent the next hour preparing the children. She left them with strict instructions. Stay inside, keep the stove fed, don't open the door for anyone except her. Then, with her heart breaking, she set off walking down the long gravel driveway toward the main road. The walk was brutal. 15 miles on a rural Kansas road with no sidewalk, no shoulder, just gravel and dust. Cars passed occasionally but didn't stop. Rural people minded their own business, and a woman walking alone wasn't unusual enough to warrant concern. After 4 hours, Sarah finally reached the small town of Meadowbrook. Population 1,200 according to the faded sign. She went straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Tom Bradley was a man in his late 50s, weathered and practical. He listened to Sarah's story with increasing concern. Your husband left you and 3 children at the old Harper place? Deliberately. Yes. Yesterday afternoon. Just drove away. That property's been abandoned for over 20 years. No power, no phone service. Barely habitable. I know. That's why I'm here. I need help. And I need to file charges against my husband for abandonment and child endangerment. Sheriff Bradley made some notes. We'll definitely be pursuing charges. But first, let's get you and your kids somewhere safe. I'll drive you back out there and we'll figure out next steps. I can't afford a hotel, or... Don't worry about that right now. Meadowbrook takes care of its own. We'll find you somewhere to stay. But when Sheriff Bradley drove Sarah back to the farmhouse, they found something that changed everything. A woman was there. An elderly woman, probably in her 70s, standing on the porch talking to Lily through the window. Sarah jumped out of the car. Who are you? Get away from my children. The woman turned, startled. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to frighten anyone. I'm Ruth Henderson. I live on the neighboring property, about 2 miles east. I saw smoke from your chimney yesterday and came to investigate. Nobody's lived here in years. Sarah relaxed slightly. I'm Sarah Harper, Daniel Harper's wife. Or was his wife. He abandoned us here yesterday. Ruth's face hardened. Daniel Harper. I remember that boy. His grandfather would be ashamed. You knew his grandfather? Frank Harper was my friend. Good man. Died about 20 years ago. This farm was his pride and joy. Ruth looked at the dilapidated house sadly. Shame what happened to it. Sheriff Bradley joined them. Ruth, these folks need help. Sarah and 3 kids, left here with nothing. I can see that. Sarah, why don't you and the children come stay with me? I've got room. And we can figure out what to do about this property. I couldn't impose. Nonsense. You need help and I'm offering it. Come on, let's get your children and their things. Over the next week, Sarah and the children stayed with Ruth Henderson. She was a widow who'd been living alone on her small farm for 15 years since her husband died. She welcomed the company and refused to accept any payment. During that week, several things happened. Sheriff Bradley located Daniel in Wichita. He'd moved in with a woman he'd apparently been having an affair with for months. The abandonment had been planned. Daniel was arrested and charged with multiple felonies: child abandonment, child endangerment, and spousal abandonment. He'll be looking at serious prison time, Sheriff Bradley told Sarah. And you'll have strong grounds for divorce and full custody. Sarah filed for divorce immediately. She also filed for emergency custody of the children, which was granted without contest. Daniel didn't even show up to the hearing. But the biggest question remained: what would Sarah do now? She had no job, no home, and no support system except the kindness of strangers in Meadowbrook. That's when Ruth made an unexpected offer. "The old Harper place," Ruth said one evening as they sat on her porch. "It's legally still in the Harper family trust. With Daniel going to prison and you filing for divorce, that property could become yours as part of the settlement. The farmhouse is uninhabitable. Now it is. But it wasn't always. Frank Harper ran a beautiful farm there for 40 years. The bones of that house are solid. It's just been neglected. I don't have money to renovate it." "Maybe you don't need to. Not right away. What if you approached it differently?" "What do you mean?" Ruth leaned forward, her eyes bright with an idea. "What if you turned that farmhouse into something that could help other families? Women and children in situations like yours, abandoned, abused, nowhere to go. The property's big enough. The house is big enough. With work, it could become a refuge." Sarah stared at her. "Like a shelter?" "More than a shelter. A working farm where families could stay, heal, learn skills, get back on their feet. There's 30 acres with that property. You could grow food, raise chickens, teach self-sufficiency. Give people a fresh start. That's a huge undertaking." "Yes, it is. But you strike me as someone who doesn't give up easily. You survived what your husband did. You walked 15 miles to get help. You're fighting for your kids. That's the kind of person who could make something like this work." Sarah thought about it. The idea was overwhelming but also compelling. Turn the place where Daniel had tried to destroy her family into a place that saved other families. "I wouldn't even know where to start." "I would. I've lived in Meadowbrook my whole life. I know every contractor, every volunteer organization, every grant program for rural development. And I know this community. People here help their own. Once word gets out what you're trying to do, help will come." Over the next few days, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Ruth's idea. She walked out to the old farmhouse and looked at it with new eyes. Yes, it was broken. But it was also solid. Built to last. Surrounded by fertile land and natural beauty. What if she could fix it? What if she could create something meaningful from her worst experience? The more she thought about it, the more the idea took root. Sarah sat down with Ruth and started planning. They would need major renovations to make the house safe and comfortable, utilities restored, electricity, plumbing funding, grants, donations, community support, legal structure, establishing a non-profit partners, social services, domestic violence organizations. It was daunting. But for the first time since Daniel had driven away, Sarah felt something other than fear and despair. She felt purpose. "Okay," she said to Ruth. "Let's do it. Let's build something." Ruth smiled. "Then let's get started." The legal process took 6 months. Daniel, facing overwhelming evidence and his own guilty plea, was sentenced to 4 years in prison. As part of the divorce settlement, Sarah was awarded full ownership of the Harper farmhouse property, full custody of the children, and child support payments to be garnished from any future earnings. But more importantly, Sarah had spent those 6 months mobilizing. Ruth had been right. Once word spread through Meadowbrook about what Sarah was trying to do, help came from everywhere. The local Methodist church organized volunteer work crews. Every Saturday for 3 months, 20 to 30 people showed up at the farmhouse with tools, materials, and labor. They patched the roof, replaced broken windows, repaired the porch, cleaned out 20 years of accumulated debris and damage. A local electrician donated his time to rewire the entire house. A plumber volunteered to update the ancient plumbing system. The utility company expedited service restoration. Sarah worked alongside the volunteers every single day, learning carpentry, plumbing, electrical work, skills she'd never imagined needing but now absorbed with determination. Lily, Ethan, and even little Grace were often there, the children playing in the yard while their mother rebuilt their future. "You're amazing, you know that?" Ruth told Sarah one day as they painted walls together. "Most people would have given up." "Giving up isn't an option when you have 3 kids depending on you," Sarah replied. "Besides, I'm angry. And I'm channeling that anger into something productive." Anger can be powerful fuel. Daniel tried to destroy us. Instead, he's going to end up creating something that helps hundreds of families. That's the best revenge I can imagine. Sarah had also been working on the legal and financial framework. With Ruth's help and guidance from a pro bono attorney, she established Harper Haven, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing temporary housing and support services for families escaping domestic violence or abandonment. She wrote grant applications to state and federal programs, rural development funds, violence prevention programs, housing assistance initiatives. The first grant came through, $50,000 from a Kansas rural community development program. It wasn't enough to fully renovate and operate a shelter, but it was a start. Then a local newspaper ran a story about Sarah's project. The story got picked up by regional media, then national media. Abandoned wife turns farmhouse into hope for other families. The attention brought donations. Small amounts at first, $20 here, $50 there. But they added up. A GoFundMe campaign raised $30,000 in 2 months. More importantly, the attention brought partnerships. The Kansas Coalition Against Domestic Violence reached out offering training and resources. A regional social services agency offered to provide case management support. Local businesses donated furniture, appliances, supplies. By the time winter arrived, a full year after Daniel had abandoned them, the farmhouse had been transformed. The exterior was freshly painted white with blue trim. The roof was solid and new. Windows sparkled. The porch had been rebuilt and now featured a welcoming swing. Inside, the house had been converted into a facility that could house up to 3 families at once. The large main floor had a commercial kitchen, a common living area, and a playroom for children. Upstairs, 3 private bedroom suites gave families their own space. The property had been cleared and planted. A vegetable garden would provide fresh food in spring. A chicken coop housed a dozen hens, donated by Ruth, that provided eggs. The old barn had been cleaned out and converted into a workshop where residents could learn skills like woodworking and crafts. Harper Haven opened on a cold December morning, exactly 13 months after Daniel had driven away. The first family arrived that same afternoon. Monica, a mother of 2 escaping domestic violence. She stood at the door with her 7-year-old son and 5-year-old daughter, a black eye fading to yellow, carrying everything they owned in 2 garbage bags. "Is this the shelter?" Monica asked hesitantly. "This is Harper Haven," Sarah said warmly. "And yes, you're safe here. Come in." Monica's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the warm, clean, beautiful space. "I've been to 3 shelters in the past year. They were all overcrowded, institutional, scary. This is home," Sarah finished. "That's what we're trying to create. Not just a place to stay, but a place to heal." Over the next year, Harper Haven served 19 families, 47 women and children total. Each family stayed an average of 6 weeks, receiving safe, comfortable housing, 3 meals a day from the communal kitchen, case management services to help with legal issues, housing searches, job placement, counseling services, both individual and group therapy, childcare so mothers could attend appointments or job interviews, skills training, everything from cooking to budgeting to job skills for children, a safe place to play, tutoring support, therapy specialized for kids who'd experienced trauma. The model Sarah and Ruth had developed was different from traditional domestic violence shelters. The rural setting provided space and peace. The farm environment offered healing, working in the garden, caring for chickens, spending time in nature. And the sense of community was powerful. Families helped each other, shared meals, supported one another. Women who'd felt isolated and helpless found strength in numbers. Sarah worked tirelessly. She was director, case manager, handyman, cook, counselor, and cheerleader all rolled into one. Ruth helped with everything, essentially serving as co-director, though she refused any official title. Lily, now 11, had become an unofficial welcome committee for new children arriving at Harper Haven. She'd show them the playroom, introduce them to the chickens, help them feel safe. "I remember being scared when we first came here," Lily told a frightened 6-year-old girl one day. "But now this is home. And you're safe here too." Ethan, 8, loved working in the garden and teaching other kids about plants and vegetables. Even Grace, now 2.5, was the darling of Harper Haven, toddling around spreading joy to traumatized families who needed something pure and innocent to remind them that goodness existed. The success stories were remarkable. Monica, the first resident, got a job as a medical assistant and moved into her own apartment after 8 weeks at Harper Haven. She stayed connected, volunteering at the farm on weekends. Jennifer, whose husband had emptied their bank accounts and disappeared, used her time at Harper Haven to complete a nursing certification. She now worked at the local hospital. Keisha arrived with 3 kids and $0 to her name. Harper Haven helped her file for emergency assistance, get into job training, and eventually secure employment as a school bus driver with benefits. Not every outcome was perfect. Some women struggled with addiction or mental health issues that required longer-term treatment than Harper Haven could provide. Some went back to abusive partners despite all support. But the success rate was remarkable. 78% of families who came through Harper Haven successfully transitioned to stable, safe living situations. The work was exhausting but fulfilling. Sarah had found her calling. 2 years after the abandonment, Sarah was invited to speak at a conference on rural domestic violence services. "When my husband abandoned me and our 3 children in that farmhouse, he thought he was destroying us," Sarah told the audience. "Instead, he accidentally created the conditions for transformation. That broken farmhouse became a place of healing. The worst thing that ever happened to me became the catalyst for the best work I'll ever do." Every family that comes through Harper Haven is proof that our worst moments don't define us. How we respond to those moments, that's what defines us. The audience gave her a standing ovation. After her speech, a woman approached Sarah. "I run a foundation that funds rural women's programs. I'd like to talk to you about expansion funding. What if Harper Haven could grow? Serve more families? Maybe even replicate the model in other rural areas?" Sarah's heart raced. "I'd need to think about that. Harper Haven is personal. It's home. I understand. But your model works. And there are thousands of rural families with nowhere to go. Think about it." That night, Sarah walked the property alone. She looked at the farmhouse, once abandoned and broken, now alive with light and laughter and hope. She looked at the garden, the barn, the chicken coop. All the physical manifestations of survival and determination. She thought about Daniel, now serving his 3rd year in prison. He'd sent one letter apologizing, asking about the children. Sarah had never responded. There was nothing to say. She thought about her children, thriving, strong, compassionate. They'd taken their trauma and learned from it. They were growing into remarkable humans. And she thought about all the families Harper Haven had helped. 47 people so far. But how many more could they help with more resources? Maybe it was time to think bigger. 5 years after Daniel abandoned them at the farmhouse, Harper Haven had transformed from a desperate survival story into a thriving model program. Sarah, now 39, stood in the renovated farmhouse kitchen preparing breakfast for 3 families currently in residence. 12 people total, including 7 children. The smell of fresh bread and scrambled eggs filled the air. Lily, 15, was helping the younger children set the table. Ethan, 12, was outside collecting eggs from the chicken coop. Grace, 5, was chattering away to a 3-year-old girl who'd arrived with her mother just 2 days ago. This was their life now. Constant motion. Constant purpose. Constant healing, both for the families they served and for themselves. With the foundation grant Sarah had received after that conference 2 years ago, Harper Haven had grown significantly. The main farmhouse served as the primary residence facility with space for 3 families. A second building, an old barn converted into living quarters, housed 2 additional families. A working farm with vegetables, chickens, goats, and even a few cows. A workshop where residents learned job skills. A small child care center office space for the 2 case managers Sarah had been able to hire. In 5 years, Harper Haven had served 147 families. Over 350 women and children total. The model Sarah and Ruth had developed was unique. Unlike traditional shelters where families stayed for a few days or weeks in dormitory-style rooms, Harper Haven provided private family suites for up to 6 weeks, 3 home-cooked meals, daily intensive case management to help with legal issues, housing, employment therapy services for both adults and children, skills training. Everything from cooking to budgeting to job skills to farming. A peaceful rural setting where trauma could begin to heal. A supportive community where families helped each other. The success rate was remarkable. 82% of families who came through Harper Haven successfully transitioned to stable housing and safe situations. Sarah had become a recognized expert in rural domestic violence services. She'd been invited to speak at conferences, consult with other organizations, and even testified before the Kansas State Legislature about funding for rural family services. But despite the recognition and growth, Sarah remained hands-on. She still welcomed every family personally, still cooked meals, still worked in the garden, still fixed broken things around the property. "You need to delegate more," Ruth told her one day. Ruth was 78 now, moving slower but still deeply involved. "You can't do everything yourself." "I know. But I don't want to lose touch with why we do this. The moment I'm just pushing papers in an office, I've lost the thread." "Fair enough. But you also need to think about sustainability. What happens to Harper Haven if something happens to you?" It was a valid question. Sarah had been working on succession planning, training staff, documenting processes. But Ruth was right. The organization was still heavily dependent on Sarah's vision and energy. One afternoon, a woman named Jessica Chen arrived at Harper Haven with her 2 teenage daughters. She was fleeing a 20-year abusive marriage and had literally nothing. No money, no job, no support system. "I found you through an online search," Jessica explained. "Every shelter I called was full or couldn't take teenagers. You were my last hope." Sarah welcomed them warmly. "You're safe here. We'll help you figure out next steps." Over the next 6 weeks, Sarah watched Jessica transform. The frightened, beaten-down woman who'd arrived gradually became confident and determined. With Harper Haven's help, Jessica filed for divorce and obtained a restraining order, enrolled in a medical coding certification program, secured emergency housing assistance, got a part-time job at the local hospital, began therapy to process her trauma. When Jessica and her daughters moved into their own apartment, she came back to Harper Haven to say goodbye. "You saved our lives," Jessica told Sarah, tears streaming down her face. "Not just physically, emotionally. You showed me I could survive. That I was strong enough." "You did the work," Sarah replied. "We just provided the space and support." "No. You provided hope. And that's everything." After Jessica left, Sarah sat with Ruth on the farmhouse porch. "That never gets old," Sarah said. "Watching someone discover their own strength." "No, it doesn't. And it's why this work matters so much." They sat in silence for a moment, then Ruth said, "I got a call today from a foundation in Missouri. They want to fund a replication of Harper Haven in their state. They'd send people here to learn the model, then help them establish a similar program there." Sarah's heart raced. "Expand beyond Kansas? Why not? Your model works. There are thousands of rural families with nowhere to go. Why should only Kansas families benefit?" "Because I can barely manage what we have now. How could I possibly oversee multiple locations?" "You wouldn't oversee them directly. You'd train others to run them using your model. Share what you've learned. Create a network of Harper Havens." Sarah felt both excited and terrified by the prospect. "That's a huge responsibility." "Yes. But think of the impact. Instead of helping 100 families a year, you could help thousands through programs across the country." "I need to think about it." "Of course. But don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't wait forever." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She walked the property in the darkness, thinking about Ruth's words. Expand. Replicate. Create a national network? It seemed impossible. But then again, 5 years ago, turning this broken farmhouse into a successful shelter had seemed impossible too. She thought about Daniel, now in his 3rd year of prison. He'd sent one letter, apologizing, asking about the children. Sarah had never responded. There was nothing to say. She thought about all the families Harper Haven had helped. All the women who'd arrived broken and left whole. All the children who'd found safety and stability. And she thought about all the families out there who still needed help. Rural families with nowhere to turn. Women in isolated areas with no resources. Maybe it was time to think bigger. The next morning, Sarah called the Missouri Foundation. Tell me more about your proposal. Over the next year, Sarah worked with 3 organizations in Missouri, Nebraska, and Oklahoma to help them establish Harper Haven-style programs. She traveled to each location, trained staff, shared her operational manual, provided ongoing consultation. It was exhausting, but it was also exhilarating. By the end of the year, there were 4 Harper Haven locations operating across 3 states, collectively serving over 200 families annually. The original Kansas location remained Sarah's primary focus, but she'd successfully trained others to replicate the model. You're building something that will outlast you, Ruth said one evening. That's legacy. I'm just trying to help as many families as I can. That's exactly what makes it legacy. Lily, now 16, told her mother one evening, I want to study social work in college. And then I want to come back and work at Harper Haven. You don't have to do that, honey. You can be whatever you want. I know. But I watched what you built from nothing. You taught me that our worst experiences can become our greatest purposes. I want to be part of that. Sarah hugged her daughter, overwhelmed with pride. Lily had taken their trauma and transformed it into compassion and purpose. When Ethan announced he wanted to study sustainable agriculture and expand Harper Haven's farming operations, Sarah felt the same pride. Her children weren't defined by what Daniel had done to them. They were defined by what they'd chosen to build afterward. 10 years after Daniel abandoned them at the farmhouse, Sarah stood before an audience of 500 people at a national conference on rural domestic violence services. She was 44 years old. Harper Haven had grown into a network of 12 locations across 8 states. In 10 years, they'd served over 2,000 families. When my husband left me and our 3 children in that abandoned farmhouse, Sarah told the audience, he thought he was destroying us. He left us with no electricity, no phone service, barely any food, in a house that hadn't been lived in for 20 years. He wanted us to fail. Instead, that farmhouse became Harper Haven, a place where families don't just survive, they transform, where trauma becomes strength, where the worst thing that ever happened becomes the catalyst for the best work you'll ever do. In 10 years, Harper Haven has helped over 2,000 families. But the real story isn't about numbers. It's about Maria, who arrived with a black eye and 2 terrified kids and left 6 weeks later with a job, an apartment, and her confidence restored. It's about Jennifer, whose husband emptied their bank accounts and disappeared, who learned farming at Harper Haven and now runs her own small organic farm. It's about Keisha, who came with nothing and left with everything, including hope. Every family we serve proves the same thing. We are not defined by what happens to us. We're defined by what we build from it. The audience gave her a standing ovation. After the conference, Sarah returned to the original Harper Haven farmhouse, the place where it had all begun. She walked through the property, remembering that terrible first night, huddled with her children in the cold and dark. The backbreaking work of renovation. The first family they'd welcomed. The hundreds that followed. Ruth Henderson, now 83, was sitting on the porch when Sarah returned. Ruth had officially retired as co-director 2 years ago, but still visited regularly. "How was the conference?" Ruth asked. "Good. Overwhelming. They want us to expand to 5 more states." "And will you?" "I think so. We've proven the model works. Why not share it with as many communities as possible?" "You've come a long way from that terrified woman who walked 15 miles to my house 10 years ago." Sarah sat beside Ruth. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. You saw potential when I saw only disaster. I saw a survivor. Someone who refused to quit. That's all you needed, someone to believe in you until you could believe in yourself." They sat in comfortable silence, watching families work in the garden, children playing, women hanging laundry on the line. "Have you heard from Daniel?" Ruth asked. "No. He was released 2 years ago. Moved to Colorado, I heard. Hasn't tried to contact us." "How do you feel about that?" "Relieved, honestly. He's irrelevant to our lives now. The kids are thriving without him. Harper Haven exists despite him, not because of him. Do you think you'll ever forgive him?" Sarah considered this. "I don't think about him enough to forgive or not forgive. He's just a person who made terrible choices that accidentally led to something good. But he gets no credit for what we built. That's all us." Lily, now 20, arrived at the farmhouse. She just graduated from Kansas State University with a degree in social work and was officially joining Harper Haven as a full-time case manager. "Ready for your first day?" Sarah asked her daughter. "I've been training for this my whole life, Mom. I'm ready." Ethan, 17, was managing the farming operations across all 12 Harper Haven locations, teaching other sites how to implement sustainable agriculture programs. Grace, 10, was already volunteering with younger children, using her own experience to help them feel safe. Sarah's children had taken their trauma and transformed it into purpose. That was the real victory. One autumn afternoon, exactly 10 years to the day after Daniel had driven away, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Daniel. He stood at the entrance to Harper Haven, looking older and tired. Sarah recognized him but felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, just indifference. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I know I have no right to be here. But I needed to see what you built. And to apologize in person." Sarah crossed her arms. "You have 5 minutes. I was a coward. I was overwhelmed and scared, and instead of getting help, I abandoned my family. I convinced myself you'd be fine, that someone would find you quickly. But I knew the truth. I was leaving you to suffer, maybe to die." "Yes, you were. I've spent 8 years thinking about what I did. 2 in prison, 6 since release. I've been in therapy. I work with a men's group for former abusers. I'm trying to become a better person." "Good for you. But that doesn't concern me. I know. I'm not here asking for forgiveness. I'm here to say, I was wrong. About everything. You were never weak. Never incapable. You were always stronger than I could ever be. I know. Daniel looked around at Harper Haven, the beautiful farmhouse, the productive farm, the families working together. You built something incredible from what I tried to destroy. Yes, I did. Despite you, not because of you. I know. I just wanted to say, the kids. Are they? She wasn't weak. She wasn't helpless. She wasn't defined by his abandonment. She was defined by what she'd built afterward. By the 15,000 families she'd helped. By the movement she'd created. By the children she'd raised to be compassionate, strong, purpose-driven adults. Daniel had tried to abandon her to nothing. Instead, he'd abandoned her to everything. The end. For every person who refused to be broken by betrayal. For every family that built hope from abandonment. For every survivor who became a builder. Your strength doesn't just save you, it saves everyone who comes after. That's legacy. They're perfect. Lily just graduated college and works here. Ethan manages our farming programs. Grace is thriving. They're kind, strong, compassionate humans. Do they hate me? They don't think about you at all. You're just not part of their lives. Daniel nodded, tears in his eyes. That's what I deserve. Yes, it is. Could I see them? Just once. No. You signed away your parental rights. You have no claim to them. And they have no interest in seeing you. I understand. Sarah looked at this man who'd once been her husband, who'd tried to destroy her, and felt absolutely nothing. You need to leave now, Daniel. Don't come back. Don't contact us. You made your choice 10 years ago. Live with it. Daniel nodded and walked away. Sarah watched him go, then turned back to Harper Haven. That evening, she gathered her 3 children and told them about Daniel's visit. He came here? Lily asked. Yes. To apologize and to ask about you. Did you let him see us? No. And I won't unless you want me to. But I wanted you to know he came. The children looked at each other. Finally, Ethan spoke. We don't need him. We have you. We have this place. We have all the families we've helped. That's our story. He's just the villain who accidentally created the hero, Grace added with wisdom beyond her 10 years. Sarah hugged all 3 children. Exactly. 15 years after the abandonment, Harper Haven had grown into a national organization. 23 locations across 14 states. Over 5,000 families served. An annual budget of $12 million raised through grants, donations, and some government funding. Sarah, now 49, had transitioned from running day-to-day operations to serving as CEO of the Harper Haven Network. She traveled the country training staff, raising funds, advocating for policy changes. But she always came back to the original Kansas farmhouse. It was home. It was where the mission had started. Lily was 25, running the Kansas location as executive director. Ethan, 22, had written a book about sustainable farming in crisis shelters. Grace, 15, was already interning at Harper Haven, knowing she'd joined the organization after college. One evening, Sarah walked the property alone. She stood at the spot where Daniel's car had been parked that terrible day 15 years ago. She remembered the terror, the despair, the certainty that her life was over. And she looked at what stood there now, a thriving farm, a network of shelters, thousands of families helped, her children grown into remarkable humans. Daniel had tried to abandon her to failure. Instead, he'd accidentally abandoned her to greatness. "Thank you for leaving," Sarah whispered to the ghost of that terrible day. "Because if you'd stayed, I never would have discovered who I really was." She walked back to the farmhouse, no longer broken, no longer abandoned, but alive with light and laughter and purpose. Ruth Henderson passed away at 88, surrounded by the Harper Haven community she'd helped create. At her funeral, Sarah spoke, "Ruth saw potential in a desperate woman and her 3 children when no one else did. She believed in us before we could believe in ourselves." Every family Harper Haven has helped is part of Ruth's legacy. The original Harper Haven farmhouse was designated a historical landmark, the Harper Farmhouse, from abandonment to sanctuary. A plaque was installed telling the story of Sarah and her children, and the movement they'd created. 20 years after the abandonment, Sarah Harper received the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her work creating and expanding the Harper Haven network. At the White House ceremony, standing with her 3 grown children, Sarah said, "This medal represents the 8,000 families we've served over 20 years. Every mother who found strength. Every child who found safety. Every person who proved that our worst moments don't define us, our response to those moments defines us. My ex-husband thought abandoning us in that farmhouse would break me. Instead, it made me. And through Harper Haven, it's helped thousands of other families become unbreakable too." That evening, back at the original farmhouse, Sarah sat on the porch with her children, Lily, 30, Ethan, 27, Grace, 20. "Did you ever imagine this?" Lily asked. "When we first arrived here that day?" "No. I was just trying to survive. To keep you kids alive. I had no idea it would become this." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Dad hadn't abandoned us?" Ethan asked. "Sarah thought about this. Sometimes. But, honestly, I think we're better off this way. What he did was terrible. But it forced me to discover strengths I didn't know I had. And it gave all of us purpose." "So you're grateful?" Grace asked. "Not grateful to him, but grateful for what we built from the wreckage. There's a difference." They sat in silence, listening to the sounds of Harper Haven, laughter from inside the farmhouse where 2 families were currently in residence, chickens clucking in their coop, the wind rustling through the corn in the fields. "This is home," Lily said. "Not just for us, but for thousands." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "And that's the greatest victory. Daniel tried to destroy us in this place. Instead, we created sanctuary. For ourselves and for everyone who came after." 25 years after the abandonment, Sarah Harper retired from active leadership of the Harper Haven Network at age 59. The organization now operated 35 locations across 22 states and had served over 15,000 families. Lily became CEO. Ethan directed all agricultural programs. Grace, now a licensed therapist, directed all mental health services. Sarah had accomplished what she'd set out to do, build something that would outlast her. Something that transformed trauma into healing for thousands of families. At her retirement ceremony, Sarah stood one last time at a microphone and told her story. 25 years ago, my husband abandoned me and our 3 young children in a broken farmhouse, hoping we'd fail. Instead, we built Harper Haven. Not just one shelter, but a movement. A proof that abandonment doesn't have to equal destruction. that betrayal can become purpose. That our worst days can become the foundation for our greatest work. Every family that comes through Harper Haven proves that we are not victims of our circumstances. We are survivors who choose what to build from the rubble. Daniel Harper tried to write our ending. Instead, he accidentally wrote our beginning. The audience, filled with former residents, staff members, volunteers, donors, and advocates, gave her a 10-minute standing ovation. That night, Sarah walked the original farmhouse property one last time as its leader. Tomorrow, Lily would take over. But tonight belonged to memories. She stood in the exact spot where she'd watched Daniel drive away 25 years ago. Where she'd thought her life was ending. And she smiled. Because he'd been wrong. About everything.